Okay, hello everyone. I'm Stephen Bartkus, the Executive Director of the Ridgefield Historical Society. I'd like to welcome all of you here to the Ridgefield History Club at the Scott House. We're located at 4 Sunset Lane in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Today's date is Tuesday, October 17th, 2023. The Ridgefield Historical Society is dedicated to collecting, preserving, and sharing the entire history of Ridgefield, from the Native Americans who lived here 10,000 years ago all the way up to the present day. And we invite you to get involved here by becoming a member, a volunteer, or a donor. We are very excited about today's program. The topic of today's meeting is Silvio Bedini's Ridgefield. In addition to having Jack Sanders in attendance, who has written over 10 books about Ridgefield's history, we are honored to have very special guests, Leandra and Peter Bedini, the children of the late author and historian Silvio Bedini. Silvio was the author of the 1958 town history, Ridgefield in Review, and he was a curator at the Smithsonian Institute. Historical research was his passion, which is how he was asked to produce a brochure for Ridgefield's 250th anniversary. But in just 3 months, it turned into a 411-page book. So we're very excited to talk about Silvio Bedini and his love of Ridgefield's history. And our program is a discussion format, so this isn't a presentation or a lecture. So we go around the room and we share our memories and our stories related to the topic, and if anyone brought any items for show and tell, photos or objects, feel free to talk about those at any time and pass them around the room. Before we get fully into the conversation, I would like to go around the room and have everyone briefly introduce themselves. If you could state your full name for the record, then we'll know who you are when you're talking. Let's start right here.
Keith Russell, a volunteer here over the last couple of months. Started.
Jack Sanders.
Sally Sanders. Lizette Voorhees. Leandra Bedini.
Peter Bedini.
Elaine Kellerman.
Barbara Serfilippi.
Joyce Legy.
Lynn Mullen. Pat Wygos. Sandy Mosiello. Aileen Egan.
Raymond Sabatini, I'm a member here. Pete Nichols.
Lucille Maclow.
John Katz.
Sarah Champion. Darla Shaw, volunteer.
Helen Demos. I'm a member of the Historical Society and a history buff.
Great, thank you all so much. Would anyone like to start? Does anyone have any memories of Silvio Bedini? And not to put you on the spot, but would
We have a lot, but
would you like to start?
Others, I'd love to hear other folks' memories of Dad. And I don't know if this is a proper format, but we can try to answer questions. I don't know where to think. Otherwise, I don't know where to start.
I can start.
Okay.
I heard a question.
I grew up in Ridgefield, worked in Ridgefield, and still live in Ridgefield. And I've read Silvio's book, and I found it very interesting about all the different aspects of Ridgefield. And along with Jack Sanders, I haven't read all your books. Sorry, Jack. And I never met your father, but just to hear all the history that he has of Ridgefield has been very nice. So
We can share some of that if you want. I'm ready. If you want to talk
Yeah,
about
sure.
it. There's a perfect picture.
Yeah. He was born in January of 17. It was apparently a dark and rainy night, because that's how he always started telling stories.
That's where that phrase came from.
He frankly was not that good at giving talks or presentations, but if you get him off of the prepared material and ask him a question, he'd be wonderful, colorful, telling of stories, and just loved to do that. He started, when he was young, he learned that he could write letters to anybody in the world and often get answers. So he was time trying to get famous people's autographs, and then at other times he had a question about a snake or something he found in the back of the house, and he would write to Frank Buck. He actually corresponded with the Bring Him Back Alive, Frank Buck. He called, he would write to the zoo, he would write to anybody, and they would, he realized they were responding to him, and that love of mail lasted until he died.
I can tell that story.
Yeah.
I wanna, if I can jump in, he would, for authors in particular, he was just a passionate reader of everything, and he would write to authors, famous authors, but he'd always put a little dig in there, or something that maybe disappointed him, or something that would tweak their interest or their need to respond. And so then that would assure that he would get a letter back saying, well, actually, what I was intending was da 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 da. That's tough, and then you have the letter and the autograph of the author.
Yeah, when we would go to the beach for 1 week a year when he was still working at the Smithsonian, they would try to do everything they could so nobody knew they were leaving the house empty. So he would put a fake bag of trash out, and so that the garbage men didn't know that he was home. They had timers for the lights and everything. And once we came back from the beach, and the mailman was just delivering mail, and he said, "How was your trip?" And my mother was furious. How did he know that we were out? And it's because every day Dad would have about 5 to 10 letters going out of the mailbox, and he didn't plan for that. So yeah, the neighbors get the mail and the newspaper, but that mail research before the internet.
And when you think about it, he did a lot of research about things in the Vatican as well as local things. And so think about, he would use a 1945 Royal typewriter, type with 2 fingers, bang, 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 bang. And he'd write this letter on carbon paper and mail it. And it could take, I remember when we were kids, 6 days to get to Italy. And then they would do whatever they needed to do to get with the response and mail it back. So he was, it was a cycle of all these different letters coming in, but he was so impatient for mail all the time. He would go check 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock, never doing it.
Sunday afternoon.
But then it would be like, he got the Holy Grail. Oh, yeah, my answer, and then go back.
No, he'd always be disappointed. It was like, oh, gee, just something from the Vatican library. Nothing important.
Yeah. Can I tell the story?
Sure.
My dad had, heart surgery? No. Anyway, he was in ICU after some surgery, and he was still really, had tubes everywhere. He was really groggy. And Mom was there and holding his hand, and I was there, and Peter was saying, we're waiting for him to come to. My mom was so worried. Is he okay? He wasn't responding. I mean, he was just sort of out of it. And then he puts his hand out, and I put my hand like this. Since he was intubated, he started writing in my hand, and I'm like, oh, and I'm going. He goes, M-A-I-L. With this, and I'm like, nail. And he goes, no, you don't have any mail. This is the first thought. And I looked at my mom, and her name was Gail. I'm like, I'm sure he meant to say G, but she doesn't even spell it that way. So.
As soon as she knew he wrote mail, she started crying. She goes, "He's okay."
Yeah. So she was fine with that. She loved his passion for everything, and she was his little research assistant for so much of this. So.
He'd have a field day today with computers and emails and so forth and so on, right?
He did.
Yeah.
He was an early adopter, actually.
Yeah. 1985 he got it.
Yeah.
And broke 2 keyboards. There's hammering. I'm not kidding. Yeah.
Once we stopped him from putting white out on the screen.
He was impatient, and he would try to do something, and he hit those F keys like this. And one day I came home to visit, and he's like, I've lost my 500 pages, my whole manuscript, and he's just beside himself. And I go and I look, and I see this itsy bitsy little square, and I start thinking, and I hit the enlarge key. Enlarge. He had hit that so many times, he had reduced his page to the size of half of a postage stamp, and so I got it back up home, and I'm like, please save that. But he got good by
He'd call me and say he's lost the whole thing, and I would say, don't worry, and he was just really down and out, and I would look, I had to set up a remote thing so I could see his computer from where I was. And I'd find a file titled Y or N. That was about 3 megabytes. I'd say, I think I know what happened, because he just remembers in what order he's supposed to answer questions like, okay, file name, and he was off by one, so he called it a yes or a
Yeah,
no.
you click the Y, yeah.
But somehow he
So he got better and better. He got email, and then he figured Google. He could find people and do research that way. And you still have lots of paper that represents all that all that he did after he figured out the computer. Considering, I think it was a decent transition for someone his age, figuring out how to do all that stuff. Because I was still having trouble, and I grew up with it more. But,
Did he grow up in Ridgefield, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was, the house that he was born in is gone now, but we were actually looking at where it was yesterday. It's just on the town side of,
That's what I
that
think.
could be it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just on the town side of Eugene O'Neill's estate, and across from it's Louis Smith, is it? Across the lane. And so that house was,
Martin
in
property.
'24,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
moved from that house to the house at 447 North Salem Road, which is where we grew up.
Oh, okay.
That was the gray house?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, okay. And were you with, Janet Bedini also grew up there, did she not?
Sounds like the whole Bedini
Yeah.
family lived in that house at one time.
We
or
didn't
another.
Yeah, at one
Cross,
time, but after
yeah.
they moved.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, may I ask a question, Stephen?
Yes.
We have a common thread, we share an uncle. Uncle Ferdinand is also my great uncle, and your father's brother, and he was a great man as well.
Wow.
But my question to you is, how long did it take your father to write the book? Do you have any idea? The history of
Ridgefield
it?
Review?
Yeah,
He claims it was 3 months. I've also heard.
3 months?
I've heard a couple months more than that, but yeah, not much more, because it was supposed to be a small pamphlet for the celebration that the town was having, and
Wow.
Dad never did anything small, so he
Yeah.
he had probably collected a lot of the facts and information over the years, because he would collect anything about anything of interest and had
His
his files.
Yeah.
But he certainly did most of it starting, I guess it was in early '58.
He was never satisfied with a final product, and so there was always something else to learn. There's more to add, and so I think, and with full attention to it, in 3 months he was able to pull that off. I have a story that my mom would tell me, and I have memory of it, but it was before Ridgefield in Review was written, so it shows that he was gathering things before that. When I was about, I guess close to 2, I didn't speak very much, believe it or not. And, but I would follow Dad. I was Dad's little shadow, and I'd go everywhere with him. And he would go into the cemeteries around here, some of them quite overgrown with the weeds and whatever, because he would find birth dates and death dates and full names of people off the tombstones. And he always believed in primary sources. You don't get your information from somebody else or some secondary source. You find out from their original source. So here we are, and this is Mom's story, that he would put me up on a tombstone, and I would sit there, and he would tell me to talk. So he could walk through all the weeds and keep track of me because he could hear my voice.
Oh.
And Mom says, and she never stopped since. That was her funny story. But it says to me that he was doing local research probably at least 3 years before he started doing the book. Because I was 5 when the book came
Yeah,
out.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good.
You were 5 when the book came out.
Can you tell something about his war service, which is kind of amazing?
Certainly. He enlisted in May of '42 and did his boot camp or basic training or whatever the right phrase is for that time up in Westover Field in Chicopee, Massachusetts. And he very desperately wanted to get into intelligence, either Navy or Army or signals or something like that. He had been interested in codes since he was 9 years old and won a contest in the St. Nicholas magazine with second place. And so finally he was told, pack everything, you're going down to Alexandria, Virginia. And so he flew down. They didn't tell him a thing, and he was met by I can't remember if it was a bus or a car that drives him into the so-called wilderness, and then he reports, and then it turned out that he had been selected to be part of a top secret program called MISX. It was referred to as Post Office Box 1142, which was the mail setup that they had for that organization. Nobody knew. I mean, the Signal Corps and everybody in Army and Navy, nobody knew about it at all. NSA, it was that secret. And what it was is that they were an escape and evasion group where they were facilitating communication with prisoners of war so that the Germans couldn't tell that messages were being hidden in the letters home. And they were also coming up with very innovative ways of putting escape aids into the kind of thing that could be sent in a care package. They were careful never to use Red Cross. They didn't want to jeopardize that, so they came up with 2 different service organization names. They would send a lot of recreational equipment, balls with radio parts in it. We have from our dad a cribbage board with a crystal radio set in it, and you could tell that it was used and where the pins went in for the headphone.
The buttons with compasses.
Yeah, buttons with compasses in it, tiny little compasses, and saws, all sorts of things that were very useful. Maps, of course, and currency that they could use. And the maps were made on silk or very thin paper, so they were folded up and sometimes put in the lining of a jacket. And Dad was the chief cryptanalyst, which means he was the one who came up with code systems that, once they were approved, would be taught to airmen in particular, but also Army and Navy and Marines. And if they were shot, and if they were trained in how to use a particular code, and then if they were shot down and captured, once they were settled, they were told to write back to anyone. And because they worked with the post office and the censorship office in New York, if any letter came in from a POW who was on a watch list because they had been taught a code, then it would be sent down to Fort Hunt in Alexandria, and they would see if there's a coded message in it or not. That was a very complex system, actually, to keep the configuration control right, because they started with next of kin. So some POW's mother would write a letter, send it to 1142, and they would rewrite the letter and add the coded message in it, give it back to the mother, who would write it in her handwriting and send it over to the POW. He'd get it, know how to decode it, and then he would write a letter back. They'd intercept it, decode it, send it on to the family. And they realized that using phonies would be better than that, so they came up with phony personalities where they were sending it. There was this, I talked to the daughter of one code user, and she said her father corresponded with somebody named Lorraine for the whole time he was in the camp, and after the war there actually was a way of getting together, and he met Lorraine, who was about 5'3", had a beard, and was a fat guy. He was quite disappointed, but it worked with the time. So yeah, it's just a very unusual thing that he happened into that shows part of his eclectic background, I guess.
And he wouldn't talk about it.
He never talked about it. You're right. They were all asked to sign an oath, and I've seen the oath in the archives, and it says during or after the war, don't talk about anything you did. And so people took that absolutely seriously. Some of the documents were declassified in 1984. Some is still partly classified, but most of it is out. But he wouldn't, even at the age of 90, I guess, when he was being interviewed by the National Park Service, who owned the Fort Hunt land, he was very reluctant to speak until they got some military guy to tell him it was okay.
And Hogan's Heroes?
Oh, yeah. Jack's just heard an interview that I did a while ago. Again, he loved Hogan's Heroes. He just got a kick out of it. We all liked it.
I found sort of odd, for Dad, just to love it, but we
he
watched a lot of it.
He said that what they were doing with hiding radios and coffee pots and various other things was not far off from what the escape and evasion people actually did. Of course, they made it funny in the show, but it was interesting.
More real than you'd expect.
Right. Yeah, I talked to the grandson of the guy that was Dad's boss in 1142, and he's, without me prompting him, he said that his grandfather always said he was convinced somebody who knew about the escape and evasion must have been involved in that TV show, because there was too much stuff to assume. Yeah.
That's great.
I was teaching in Rye, New York in early 1960s, and there was a football coach named Ben Bedini, and I always heard he was related to a famous Ridgefield family. Now, is that you?
I'm not sure we're the famous family.
That's me.
Oh,
He's my uncle.
Oh,
He was my
okay.
uncle. My mother, Lydia Bedini Voorhees, is just turned 100 in September. But they were all cousins. So
Oh,
Silvio,
okay.
Ferdinand, my mother Lydia, Ben, Mariko, all
The
cousins.
five
That's
brothers that came over in, 1907, 1912, around then, the five brothers, well, in that big picture,
Yeah, next one.
there,
There we are.
those, there are five brothers. And so, one of them is Lisette's grandfather, the father of Ben, one's our grandfather, the father of Silvio and Ferd, so that's.
I knew you all these years. I never knew you were related.
Well, we Bedinis kind of keep a low profile, but we're everywhere.
I wanted to show you something that Leandra and Peter sent me a while ago that indicates what kind of a researcher and scholar Silvio was. This is a copy of Ridgefield in Review, but if you will notice, it's quite a bit thicker than the copies that you have.
Yeah.
And that's because after the book came out, Silvio had bound into it in various places note pages like this. So that after the book came out, when he found out more information, or if he found out something that corrected information that was in there, he could put it in. And here's an example of a page
Wow.
that he did, and his writing is, tiny, but so precise, and they're all, keyed to text. And my hope is to transcribe all these and do a kind of an addendum to the book based on this information. He's also tucked into this book all kinds of information that he picked up afterwards, and notes and calls from people, letters, there's brochures. So it's really quite a little library of information. This is a letter, for instance, from Rollo Lynch of Wilton, who had just finished reading Ridgefield in Review, found it most interesting, and congratulate you. I'm a little sorry to see that my mother's house on Wilton Road East, Flat Rock, was not mentioned. And, anytime you do a book about a town, whether it's history or just a modern geography or anything, there's always people that are offended by omission. And also, just to show what kind of respect they had for this book when it came out, this is a brochure that has all kinds of information about Ridgefield in Review. This book only costs $3.50. So.
$3.
Well, the mail order cost, I
Oh,
guess. Yeah. Well, now see, it says $3.50 post-paid. Now the 50 was probably for the postage. But it gives a summary of each chapter, and then it tells little details like the number of pages and that it's coded stock on the photos. And but they really thought highly of this when it came out, and they were the people that did the 250th anniversary celebration for which this book was published. were very proud of it, and it was much more than they ever expected.
The chairman of that was Carl Nash?
Carl Nash, yes. Our boss for many, many years.
Follow up to what Jack's saying, I just have found a file of newspapers, not newspaper articles, the whole newspaper, that I want to make sure you have the whole thing. Anyway, I took the clippings about his book, and I have them here, but I've got a lot more different things. But it shows that starting in January, the 250th committee is very excited about the prospect of Silvio Bedini, who was on the history committee, writing this brochure. Okay, and then you go on, and then Bedini states that the brochure is probably going to be a couple hundred pages. and you go on further, and then it's like, Bedini says the book is going to be at least 300, maybe 400 pages. But what's interesting to me is the newspaper kept printing these announcements about the progress of the book. It should be coming out August 1st. And then later in August, it might be going to the printer soon. You know, so it took a while to get done. One thing I wanted to note is, shoot, I just had it and then I lost it. So they made dummy copies. They were blank inside, but they had the cover, right? And they put them in the store windows, you know, coming soon. And in July 31st, it says in the Ridgefield Press, dummy copies of Ridgefield in Review are now on view. They show the dust jacket and cover and contain blank pages. Get this, the author's brother, this would be Uncle Ferd, the author's brother commented, "You don't get much for $3 nowadays, do you?" But wait until the real copy next month. Those of us who have read it found it interesting, illuminating, clear, and worthwhile. A bargain at $3, and think of its future value. Copies of George Rockwell's history are also selling for $20 and $30. So anyway, it goes on, and then the last. Here's, I got a second to the last. This is a picture of people buying it at the corner. They set up stations evidently in town. Some of you may, I don't know, maybe were part of that, but this is so the full page ad, the book. There's an article in there. The book is out. It literally starts with "the book is out," and here's your full page ad for Ridgefield Review. So I was impressed, being 5 when this came out and all this. I don't remember a lot of the hubbub, but reading all this and putting it together and following it, it was really interesting how exciting the town was to have its own. It says Ridgefield's own book, its own history, and so we're proud of that.
Yeah, that's cool.
What year was it?
58.
58.
That's a good year, right?
I was born.
And that was quite a process back then, because Silvio was, everything had to be typeset by somebody else, I guess in New Haven, where the printing company was. Then it all had to come back to be checked, proofread.
Yeah.
And then all the pictures had to be scanned and done in a very pain in the ass process, pardon the expression, of plate making back then. It was all hard, what we called hot type, and photo engraving, and all that took time, and they'd have to send it back so that he could check it to make sure it was okay, and yet they still got it out in this amazing amount of time. So people must have been working all night.
As kids, and some people know this, so Dad had such a passion. I mentioned to Lucille that curious. If you pick one word, curious would be, and he'd find something and he'd want to research it. He'd, this is unusual. I mean, he loved junk shops. Even, it was like my birthday gift was we would go antiquing. I loved doing it with him, and so he's curious. He's always looking for things. And he was always writing. He was writing the letters. He was writing his ideas. He literally, after he passed, we found a sheet that had 13 projects he was working on. And he'd gather what he could, and while he's waiting for correspondence or whatever, he'd start on this one, he'd start on this one. So he had these different areas that he was always building until he had enough to do something with it. But as a kid, and this is what I'm getting at, I remember he'd be up early. Often, he'd go to work. After he retired, he'd be in his study on the typewriter. he'd have lunch with Mom, and he'd be back in the study, and he had a day bed, and there were naps in between, you know, so, but watching TV, just be thinking, you know, then you get up and there's more. But I remember anywhere from being, I guess, older teenager, young adult, I'd come home, and there he was in the study at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Even I'd come back, you know, as a 40, 50-year-old, come and visit. I go out with friends. I get home around 1 o'clock, and there's Dad in the study. And sometimes we had the best conversations then. But he was always up, and we go close everything out around 1 o'clock, I guess, and got up around 6:30 in the morning. The naps helped, I think, during the day.
Yeah, but, and occasionally when we visit him and he's there, it's like 12:30 in the morning, and you look on his desk, and he's got one of his things from a very diverse collection of things, and he sort of rotated through it. He picked it up again and looked at what he knew about it and was writing questions to send out about that particular item to try to learn more about it. And then a month later, it might be a different thing that you'd see on his desk that he's focusing on.
When he was writing about Jefferson, there'd be pictures of things that were Jefferson related, and he'd hang them all around in front of him, so he was sort of, you know, really immersing himself.
So
in
he
it.
had other books published then, did he? or-
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, this was his first book of 22, 23 now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So were there, just to get some idea, were several others?
He had, I think, a total of 23. So,
Many.
wrote several on Thomas Jefferson, some having to do with surveying,
I see.
one on a Pope's elephant who was from the 1600s, I believe. One
Children's book.
a children's book, one on called The Trail of Time, about incense seals, Asian timekeeping pieces. So he was very eclectic, and there was that's why I meant, like, oh look, a coffee cup. I wonder where that came from. You know, so actually we have a book on coffee cups.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite that bad, but it was you know.
Curious.
Yeah, very
Curiosity.
curious. Very
Have either of you followed in his footsteps?
I just retired from 40 years in academia, so I did writing, but a little bit different than his. But I do have a passion for the historic, and I did a couple of my pieces were history within my field. So.
And we still have many boxes of his research materials in my garage that we're trying to
Can you tell, speaking of antiques, about the Silent Night clock?
Certainly.
Go ahead.
Should I start?
Yeah.
So, 3 months, Ridgefield in Review, his first book. A book about silent night clocks and the brothers who made them came out 2 years ago, and he and my mom worked on it for 56 years. So that's the other end of the spectrum for the first book, last book.
But he got the clock.
So the story of the silent night clock began when he used to,
Picture this.
when he came back after college, working for the Bedini company, he would go around and check on all the jobs and take advantage of that to stop in the antique shops around. Lila McCune was one, and Florine Maine, and he credited Florine Maine with teaching him to hold something and feel it and think about how it was used, and did it make sense that was something that somebody actually used, or did it look fake? And you know, over the years, he actually got a sense for that. And it was in a shop in, I think, maybe in North Salem, where he found this wooden clock that's probably 2.5 feet tall, in a wooden crate in this guy's back room, and it had a brass movement with some Latin written on it. He thought that was very interesting, although he didn't know what it was. And he would keep going back and visiting, and he didn't have a lot of money, and he didn't want to spend a lot of money, but he ended up convincing the guy to sell it to him for $20, and he bought it, and what was written on there was Giuseppe Campana's Roma, and so that was, he started doing research on who this Giuseppe Campani guy was, and my mom, they weren't married yet, this is in 1950, and she was in New York City, and she would go into the New York Public Library and help him do some research and write him back. And then he started there were cardinals that he was communicating with, and one of them wrote back once and said, I've been happy to help you, but I feel I'm too fragile now to continue, so I'm handing this over to my younger brother, who was another cardinal, who was, the younger brother was about 90. The older brother was about 95, and he said, "Oh, I'm too old for this, I'll give it to him." But then he did most of the research of that book, but then when he died, there were some reference notes that weren't complete that had to be done, and a friend of his who's a clock collector actually supported a young historian to finish that up. So we were thrilled to have that book come out.
So our plan was to, that's the book. Oh, before I show you, I wanna tell you, my mom was completely invested in Dad's work and in Dad, and loved doing the research with him, and did editing, and we'd come home and they would be yelling at each other like it was a really dysfunctional household, and they go, "Oh, hi dear." And it was like, "What's going on?" "Well, he thinks it should be they, and I think it should be thus," and this kind of thing. They're arguing over a word in his thing. But she indexed. This is way before they had the computerized indexing, so I still have some copies of Mom with all the Italian names and the pages that they're on, and then Dad would add a new chunk to the chapter, and Mom would have to go and rearrange everything. But she did a lot of work, and one thing that always stuck with me that was so neat is Dad would go to the Vatican libraries to do some research, or he'd go to different parts of Italy where the brothers had lived, and he brought Mom with him, and she got a pass. I found this recently. She got a pass to go into the Vatican archives libraries, which is, you have to be a certain kind of researcher, and they were able to, or Dad was able to get one for Mom too, so she got to go, the big books, and move the pages and all that. And so that was just, such a thrill for her to be able to assist with that. So that's like, I just want to show it. This is the laundry bag from the hotel I'm from. This is an idea of what Dad would do with 56 years of writing, and then additions from. So that's the kind of clock, as Peter said. This is not the actual one.
I have read this book, and it's an incredible historical kind of travel of the clocks and history of the Vatican. And the amount of research that has gone into it is incredible. So just the historical value was actually quite eye-opening for me, because I always think of the Vatican as a religious thing, but they were really true keepers of, they were very much into science and exploration, and you don't see that, you don't hear about that today. And they kept incredible records, as anybody who touches this book would see.
The Pope and a lot of the princes and whatnot would commission, like the Campani brothers commissioned them to do the clock you didn't really talk about it being a silent night clock. They did a silent movement because the Pope had insomnia, and so they created a silent movement with a lot of mercury, I believe. And it's a night clock because it's a projection clock. There's a light on the inside of the clock, and it projects through these dials that are cut out, and the dials, there's 3 dials on the back of the ones that I've seen, and each one turns, so like the 1 o'clock, imagine a half moon that's cut out from the clock, and there's a Roman numeral 1 that comes up through the half moon, so it's 1:15, 1:30, 1:45, and it disappears, and now it comes to 2. And it's, if you looked at the movement, there's 3 dials that spin, so you got 1, 4, and 8 or something like that, and so each one comes up and they move around. It's really complex. And then there's a light projecting that light out, that out of the clock, so you can see. There's quite the guy in Italy who sponsored the final production of this has 14 of them, something like that, because he's a collector of projection clocks. So
who has the clock now? Do you still have?
Peter's got that one. I have another one. There were 2. Dad had the 3rd one, but he had 2. And when Dad used to call it the one Peter has, Little Joe, because Giuseppe Campani did. And then the other one was called Katie, because it was supposedly made for Queen Catherine something. I don't know. I can't remember the details on that, but, you know, we're divvying up
Pope
stuff.
would commission these for different people that he
Yeah.
either knew or
Yeah.
wanted to impress.
So so we're a little, you know, which one do you want, which one, I don't know, which one, and we're trying to be nice to each other, so after mom and dad are gone, and we're like this, and so we decided, okay, on the count of three, just yell out the one you want, we went, 1, 2, 3, he goes Joe, and I go Katie, and we're like, so Katie's, it's more feminine, it's got some gilding, it's got spiral, like, columns that come down, it's a little more petite, and, I just like it better, so, Joe's family, so.
Did your parents ever talk about your father growing up in Ridgefield as part of an immigrant family?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he hinted at Italians, some Italian Americans of his era being treated not as well by some of the other nationalities that had been immigrants beforehand. It wasn't a major thing for him, but he sort of, almost matter of factly say that in school sometimes he was not treated as well as he should be.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because also he was from a family that did a lot of manual labor, and if that had any impact on his perception of how he was treated.
I think a lot of Italian immigrant families in that time did feel that they were probably discriminated against. My mother, her cousin, used to bring dandelion sandwiches for lunch, and nobody wanted
Right.
to be sitting next to anybody eating dandelion sandwiches. Never, ever, ever.
Right.
Nobody wanted to trade with her.
Sorry?
No one wanted to trade with her.
She
Like
would
I remember.
often say, so-and-so had her Wonder Bread sandwiches. And I have dandelions.
And I know that the Bedini brothers, a lot of them were chauffeurs or did work for some of the people that own these grand estates here, and so that sort of class differential, I think, had a little bit to do with it.
Yeah, I just didn't know if they talked about it, because I'm from an immigrant family.
Yeah.
Who were the 5 brothers? Can you name them?
Yeah, Alex, her grandfather, the oldest, Vincent, our grandfather, second, and, I think Frank was next, Joe,
Joe.
and David.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they had
David.
Amalia and Maria were sisters that stayed in Italy. But Maria's husband, Ben Rossini, and gosh knows if his name was really Ben, everybody was Ben or Jimmy or something. But he was here working with the Bedini brothers.
Okay.
Yeah.
There they are, quick, there they
Yeah,
are.
yeah. Nice looking.
And that's
young men.
that's Ben. That's
Oh.
your Uncle
My
Ben.
Uncle Ben,
I think.
on the blanket?
No, it's Ferd. There's Dad on the left. There's Ben. There's
On
Ben.
the right, on the
Yeah.
right-hand side, with
Yeah.
my grandmother.
There's my great-grandparents.
That's your
Yeah, Serafina and
great-grandparents.
Antonio.
Yes,
They came over in 1920 or so when
Yeah.
Alex brought them over.
yeah.
Do you know what brought them to Ridgefield? Did you ever hear that story? Of all places where they could have settled.
My understanding, and Jack can correct me, is that Ridgefield was in need of infrastructure around that time and building sort of sewers and water lines and
In what year?
around 1907.
Yeah, they were doing, they probably worked on the Eight Lakes Port of Missing
Port of
Men
Missing Men,
Resort.
right, they did.
Yeah,
They did, yeah.
yeah, they're building lots of roads and ponds and all kinds of things up there in the wilds of West Mountain.
Right. And then that led them to work with the big estates that had been using Ridgefield as a summer place instead of now they commute from it when they lived in New York.
Did the Bedini family come from the same village in Italy that many of the other Italian families in Ridgefield came from?
Probably from the same region. It's the
Ancona.
La Marche, Ancona, Fano, Senigallia,
Monterado.
Monterado, yeah.
And there's other Bedinis where we were looking at, oh, my dad did a little, I didn't bring it, but he did a little ancestry chronology when he was about 10. It's obviously a little kid handwriting it, it was by Silvio Bedini. And it had all the brothers and their wives and the kids, so all the stuff that we found as well. And then on the bottom he has Charlie Bedini, who I believe is Cesare, who was Vincent's cousin. So we think Antonio's brother.
Yeah.
And so we were at the cemetery yesterday and we saw Cesare's family.
Cesare.
Cesare?
Cesara.
Cesare. Okay, the guy, that's a,
Cesara.
Cesare's the grandmother, I'm talking about the Charlie.
Charlie.
His name was Cesare?
Oh, okay.
I believe, that's what was on the tombstone. Yeah. No, Cesare, I know.
Okay.
I'll call
Were
Charlie.
they related?
Yeah, that's what, they must have been Antonio, our great-grandfather's brother's kid. Yeah. Anytime we ask any of the elders, about Charlie, oh, he's a cousin. But how? How is he connected? Oh, he's a cousin. Yeah, so.
Yeah, Dad's father was relatively strict, at least the story we get. I didn't know him. He died in 1947. But Dad was a bit of a strong will himself. But he resented that his father wanted him to hold the lantern and learn about car engines, so he would hold the lantern like this. Or he was supposed to mow the lawn, and he would take a book with him, and he'd sit under a tree reading the book. But then his father realized the lawnmower isn't moving, so he could stop it up and find Dad sitting there reading, and hell would be to pay. Once Dad was in the rumble seat of a car. I can imagine how old the car was. He's going down the road, and he was hopping up and down, and they hit a bump, and he goes tumbling out, and his father pulls the car over and goes back, and he's mad at him. He grabs him and brings him back to the car to go on. It didn't matter that he fell out of the car.
He didn't break anything, he's not bleeding, he's fine. Yeah. He was stern.
Did your father ever say what first got him interested in history? Was there anything in particular that he was exposed to as he was growing up?
My understanding is that his brother was 4 years older, and so at that one age, Dad wasn't really helpful to the company, but Uncle Ferd was, and so Dad was sort of left alone. The nearest children were probably a couple miles away, so he felt very alone. He learned to love to read. Mary Hampton, Walter Hampton's daughter, actually somehow encouraged that with him and others. And I know that he got St. Nicholas magazine and some others, and they would often have quizzes or things like that got him interested. And then again, when he had a 1930 stamp collection, and when he started writing to anybody to ask him things, he just started collecting that. And he wasn't really collecting any items until after he came back from the war, and it was around 1946 or 7 when he was living with Ben. That's when he started writing for after.
I think part of it was when he realized he could write to someone and get an answer, when he could basically ask a question beyond his family, beyond his locale, about things in the greater world, and he'd get these answers. I think it was really addictive. I mean, he just got such a passion for it that I can write a letter, somebody will write me back, and I'll have an answer, or I'll have a lead to an answer. And that was often, he got this information, and I got your name from, I got this, and just gathering as much. I don't know. The times we talked, that's the kind of thing about his writing.
And one thing that reminds me of is that he ended up in 1961 becoming he started out as a curator at the Smithsonian Institution and then became deputy director of its History and Technology Museum for many years. And the charter of the Smithsonian Institution is the increase and diffusion of knowledge. And I can't think of a better one for Dad, as he was always reading and getting the knowledge and collecting it. And then he was writing about it, so he was increasing and dispersing the information. And when he collected things, it wasn't for their value, it was for their historic value. He wanted to know who used them, why, how old it is under what circumstances.
And leave a legacy of these things for the people to read about.
Yeah.
When he was in the Smithsonian, he advanced to assistant director and then deputy director of the American History Museum, but he clearly, that was not his happiest time. He did not like the administration. And my understanding, I'm probably exaggerating it, but he was able to create a position called Keeper of the Rare Book Collection. And he felt very firmly that we have all these rare books and they're hermetically sealed behind a glass case, nobody can touch them, and oh look, rare books. And he said people should use these. These are books. They're full of information. You know, you had to have authorization, and there's a way to use them. And then
he was key in convincing Vern Divner, who lived near here, to give a major part of his collection of historical science books to the Smithsonian. So there's now the Divner Library, part of the Smithsonian, and I think that helped him with his argument that there should be a keeper of rare books, because that was a big increase to the data.
They didn't really have an office space for this new position, so they put him on the first 3 floors of his museum were exhibits, and then the 4th and 5th were the administrative offices. So they found a sort of a little corner area on the 3rd floor, right off all the porcelain and teacups and all that. And he says he'd be working in his office and there'd be a knock at the door, and there'd be some little old lady who wanted to know about that teacup on it. And he didn't really know much about it. He always enjoyed interacting with the public. But yeah, no, and he was happy during that. He retired from that position. So.
It sounds as if he talked with you both a lot about what he was doing at any particular time. So you were familiar with everything he worked on?
Oh, the dinner table was Dad's latest development, and since Mom was so invested in it, we had one wall phone down the little stairs, and we could never answer it during dinner. It was about us. So obviously, we'd come home out of school. I played sports. Peter did chemistry. I don't know what you did. And he did his stuff. So anyway, we talk about family things, and then sort of here's Dan. He goes, oh, I got a letter from the he didn't, but I got a letter from such and such, and he would talk about it, and then we'd say, well, tell us about Campana, and he'd give the history, and he'd walk through this, and so it was really
well, it was a dark and rainy night in 1917 when I was born.
Yeah. Oh, a couple little trivia things. One is one is he didn't have a birth certificate, a complete birth certificate, so he went to the military because it was a dark and stormy night in January. It was snowy, and it was a horse-drawn carriage that the doctor came in. And the story is my grandmother and my grandfather were arguing if Dad should be named Silvio or Sebastiano. And they argued, and the doctor was like, I need a name, I need to go home, and they didn't give him a name, so he just left. And again, the story is that he found this birth certificate in his pocket one day and just turned it into the town hall.
And it just said
Bedini. So then he goes to sign up with the military, and they go, well, this isn't good enough. We need a first name here. So there's a second birth certificate in the town hall. I remember calling them years ago because I was trying to put some papers together, and they said, yep, we got one that does not have a first name and one that does have a first name. So, he loved telling stories like that. My grandmother, I guess grandfather, Vincent, was a driver for O'Neill.
Oh.
What are you laughing at?
You're going to tell the weekend story?
No, I wasn't going to do that, but I'll lead up to that.
Let's hear it.
So, and my grandmother did laundry and stuff, and at the O'Neills would often bring Dad, and Dad was roughly the same age as Shane, O'Neill's son, and they would play and get into trouble together, and they somehow always do something where Eugene would come and,
I mean, he was a fury. He wanted to write. He didn't want to be disturbed, and so Shane and my dad ended up climbing up to the attic of a barn outside, and then you look over, they see Eugene O'Neill sitting there with a white sort of robe thing on, and there's a sculptor who's sculpting a bust of him for something, and he just turned and looked at him, and they turned and left. But then at a different time, Dad went up and somehow locked himself into the bathroom up on the 2nd floor, and then panicked when he couldn't get out, and then Shane couldn't get him in. They're little kids. And so Eugene had to call our grandfather to come over with a ladder. These are two fathers that were not happy because they had to get into there and unlock it and get it out, and that stayed with them for a while. weekend, if we have another minute, the weekend story is that the writer Malcolm Cowley and the poet Hart Crane were visiting Eugene O'Neill for a weekend when he was living here at Brook Farm. And they arranged for our grandfather Vincent to come to the Stamford train station and pick him up and drive him over to O'Neill's house, which he did. And then they had a good dinner, and afterwards, for some reason, Eugene took people down into the basement, and then he realized that there were these barrels of cider there because Grandpa Vincent never wanted to waste anything, so he used the old apples into the cider. Well, it had gotten hard. Eugene opens it up, and they just started drinking the cider, and Malcolm Cowley says they didn't find him for 2 weeks. They found him in Hell's Kitchen in New York. While Cowley and his wife just had Vincent take him to the train.
This was written too, he published.
Yeah, Cowley wrote about it.
Stephen, I know we're near the end, but we have a request of the club.
Sure.
May we share that?
Yes, definitely.
You go first. The thing that we brought. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Come on, brother, get on with it.
Supposed to read her mind.
You got one thing you're gonna talk
I
about.
know. May I ask you to hold up the back of that book? That's a depiction of a thumb latch that was probably from Ridgefield, and it has an inverted heart in the top, which
Jack, you can hold up your copy for this end of
it. Made it very interesting to my father, and it turns out that in May of 1714, the town was given permission to use the inverted heart as its brand for horses, I think. And Dad found this in a junk shop in Danbury, and it's a part of the thumb latch. You would have another part to it here, but it is it's early 1700s, I believe. It's from Ridgefield, as far as you can tell. It's got the inverted
That's
heart
what
in the top.
the junk shop owner said it was from Ridgefield.
And it has scratched in it an I and a K, which Dad did some research, and we have some. They think, is it Isaiah?
Isaac.
Isaac Keeler?
I thought it was Isaac, but check.
Yeah.
No. Keeler.
Oh, wow.
So many
Okay.
killers.
Yeah,
And it's not an original, like, engraving in there, it looks like it's been added.
yeah. So we have some of his correspondence when he was trying to learn about this, and the story is incomplete, so I guess one request we have is we would like to have the Historical Society accept this as a gift, and then if they will help finish finding out the story.
Thank you
We
so
have,
much.
we have a lot of Dad's research on it here, and if we can after the meeting, maybe a photo, if we didn't make a copy of it, so you can have, we have stuff, so anyway, we have stuff if you can make a copy so we can keep the original.
Oh, thank you so much. That's wonderful.
And I've got one more thing.
Sure.
This is another request from the club. So my father married my mother. My mother was German. Her father was in Germany, Kapellmeister, a concertmaster, and they moved over here. He played in not the New York Symphony, but he played his violin, and he was a composer. And I'm still going through boxes of papers too. I got one mom, so I'm going through these boxes, and I find this score that's for a band, and a musical score for a whole band, and it's called Ridgefield in Review. And my mother's father, my father's father-in-law, wrote this band score. Now this is a copy of it. I have the original. I didn't bring, but in his hand, beautiful lettering, numbering, whatever you do with to make the notes. And if you look through, these are all the instruments down here: piccolo, flute, whatever. I'll abbreviate this. My neighbor is a retired band teacher at a high school. He has a computer program that he said, if you give it to me, I can put in the piccolo, I can put in the clarinet into the computer. I can put in, he put it on a, you're all choked up? I cried last time. So he did. and I made a copy of the score, and I have a WAV file that I will send to you all if you want it, of the band thing. There's gunshots in it for the Battle of Ridgefield. There's, he says, listen carefully to the piccolo, because it does God Bless America, and I think a little bit of the national anthem throughout it, just hidden in there. He goes, there's surprises in there. Listen, my neighbor is so excited about this, and he's gonna look into getting it published. So the mystery we have is, was it ever played here? It has a piano piece, so it wasn't a marching band. So it probably was like something at the park, you know, in a gazebo kind of band. And if anybody feels like pursuing this, that's really all I know. But we'd be interested in finding out if it was ever used. I'm assuming it was for the 250th celebration. So, but yeah, and I'll save the WAV file. It's a little pet piece, sounds like a Calliope happy band song. So,
That's amazing.
so,
Yeah.
and that's, I'll give this to you guys. So,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It sounds like your father's legacy lives on in you guys.
And my mother's to some extent with that.
Right.
I found music that they wrote together. My mom wrote the words, my grandfather wrote the music. They had one piece copyrighted, but back then the copyright lasted 7 years, so it's not right now. But yeah, so it's small. The you know, the music sheets are gigantic. That's just a small version, but I can get you the PDF for that too.
This is long.
Yeah, it's actually 3 minutes. I think it's just under 3 minutes long to play it. So,
What about the Bedini grandkids and cousins and so forth? Do any of them show a talent or particular
don't have
interest?
kids.
Well, let's see. My mother, who was the cousin, did spend quite a bit of time with Silvio. My parents were State Department, so we were assigned abroad. And when Silvio came up with an idea or whatever, and my mother could facilitate it, she did. And she's actually, what was it, the Something in Time? The Trail of Time. She was, you know, she helped.
Yeah.
I don't know whether she helped write it, but she helped with some of the research. And at the time, we were living in Hong Kong, and we're also very much rust and dusters. We'll go into dirty shops and whatever. And this was probably in the mid 70s or so. We were in Hong Kong, and my mother and I would go up Cat and Ladder streets looking for the incense clocks, and spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
Well, your daughter contacted me out of the blue. I'm sorry, I didn't know that I thought you had one son. I didn't know about Maria. About 5 years ago, and says, I'm your cousin. I'm living with your other cousin Lydia, my mom, and I'm driving back up north, and I'm in North Carolina. I'd love to meet with you. And I'm like, at first I'm like, are you really my cousin? Yeah, okay. She did, and she was 25 when she did that. She stayed with me, and I brought out a lot of the ancestry of pictures and the genealogy, and she seemed really interested. I really hope she keeps that interest, because I think, you know, we need to continue, you know.
I think, you know, we do have, I mean, we do have, my son's an aerospace engineer, so there is that kind of technical kind of, you know, research going on, yes.
Now, there was a technical museum mentioned earlier, right? Not too familiar with
He
that.
was the deputy director of the Museum of History and Technology.
What was it again?
The Museum of History and Technology. It's now called the National Museum of American History. And we're still wondering where the technology went.
I think it's there, because
It's just moving so fast, technology.
I have a quick question. What was your father's level of interest in the Battle of Ridgefield, and did he ever get involved in archaeology? Many museum people and curators are also interested in archaeology.
he has rocks. I mean, there's bricks and rocks and things in the office all the time. I don't know that I know what they were, but I don't think he did any formal archaeological pursuits. But he'd always say, "This is from the."
She was interested in the history of it, but not really more than that. I think in that annotated book that Jack showed, he had included the legend to the scary map.
Yeah, which wasn't in the original. The key.
Either that or in those papers that you gave the Historical Society.
I believe it's in the
Yeah,
book
okay.
because I think I took a photo of it because I finally wanted to have that. So Richard Scarry, he's the one that also illustrated the dominoes.
Yeah.
The Spotted Stones. Dad wrote a children's book about the origin of dominoes, or the origin of dominoes, called The Spotted Stones, and Richard Scarry illustrated that book as well. Yeah, I was looking at it.
To read it.
He sent us a PDF and he printed it, my neighbor, and he printed a copy, and I'm like, okay, David, you're a lot younger than I am. But I'll send the PDF as well, so if you, it's up to you.
I wanna hear it.
I have it on my phone, you can, I'm not gonna take time now, but hang out for a minute afterwards and play it.
Thank you so much. So we have reached the time for today's program. Are there any final questions or stories that anyone would like to share? Okay. Well, I want to thank the both of you for joining us today. It was a very special addition to our History Club this month, and I would like to remind everyone that our next gathering is going to be on Tuesday, November 21st, here at 10 o'clock at the Scott House, and we hope to see you then. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.